Hey there and welcome. This is our monthly affiliate training, and today it's just going to be me, and we're going to video record this by ourselves, so not a live training, but some really important information that we're going to dive into, primarily regarding shipping, fraud prevention, and just general issues that we see that we don't want affiliates to fall into that trap. So we're going to talk some best practices, some things that you can do, some things to look for, and ultimately, how do you protect yourself from some of these issues. As an overview, we're going to talk a little bit on what we do from a bidder verification side, which is not 100%. Unfortunately, the internet is anonymous still in a lot of ways. You can do a lot of things, but it's not 100%. How you can prevent some of that fraud, identify those red flags early, and that's going to be the big theme here. Is you need to be vigilant about what to look for, and when those flags go up, take an extra look. Some best practices, and then some dispute resolution as well. So again, the theme here, we're going to do everything that we can on the technology side to assist in fraud prevention. But ultimately, this is your business, and it does start and end with you. So you do need to take some responsibility in that aspect. You can't just blindly trust that everything is good to go and there's no people out there with ill intent. I will say, luckily it's not an overwhelming issue, but it still happens occasionally where we have a fraudulent charge or fraudulent issue that needs to be addressed. So again, you need to be extra vigilant. You need to know what to look for, and when to take another step, another look at a situation. And we'd encourage you to contact us here at KBID Corporate as well. If anything looks off, if you have questions, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for, to take another look, give you our advice. Ultimately, we don't want you to be caught in a bad situation where one transaction can really hurt a business. So the types of fraud and issues that you typically see in the auction space, we'll just kind of touch on the main ones that I'm seeing or aware of, and not even necessarily just through KBID, but just overall. First one, NSF checks. Checks are becoming rarer and rarer in the auction world. Some affiliates still accept them. I know we always did, and it really was never the $15,000 check that scared us when we were taking in payments. It was usually the $300 check. And of those NSFs, most of them we were able to collect on, whether it was a mistake, an issue out of the wrong account. Most of those situations were not intentional, fraudulent type checks. The other one in that realm is counterfeit bills. It's been a long time since I've heard or seen that, but again, it doesn't mean it can't happen. So how do you protect yourself with the counterfeit bills? It's the pen, checking the $100 bills and 20s and making sure that it all passes that. Secondly, I know in really large auctions, when we were expecting a lot of cash, I would actually segment out different chunks. If someone came in with 20 grand in cash, I didn't throw that all in the till with the rest of the payments. And the reason being, if there was an issue with some of those bills, now I know who it came from. You can take that a little overboard, but on those big transactions, I made sure to do that. And it's just another extra step or extra thing you can do to make sure that you feel a little bit more protected. The next issue, again, very rare, but the old switcheroo, I call it, where a buyer shows up, they know a bidder ID, maybe it's already paid for. They state that they're them. They go get the item and away they go. And then an hour or 2 hours later, the real winning bidder shows up and is starting to ask where their item is. So again, a pretty rare scenario. And how can you protect against this one? We'll talk a little bit about that later. There's some ways you can require them to sign off on. You can ask them to verify information on that and that account. A couple different things you can do. The next one, ID theft or credit card theft. So, credit card fraud. Someone orders something shipped. Turns out that the credit card was not theirs, and 2 weeks later you get that chargeback. Now, this is the biggest one I want to focus on today. And again, not something that we're seeing on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis, but when it does happen, it hurts. And these are things that we want you to be taking a look at so you're not falling into that trap. Last issue, general chargebacks. And if any of you have been through that, most of those situations are usually due to a disagreement. They said it was this and it was that. I no longer want to pay for it, so I'm charging it back on my credit card. A lot of those scenarios, there's usually a middle ground so that no one's left holding the entire bag there. It's unfortunate that some buyers will use that as a way to negotiate, quote unquote, but it is something that we see occasionally, and most of the time we can prevent that by doing our front end work. We're putting in the right information in the description, we're showing good pictures. If we're wrong, we're owning that and making it right with the buyer. And we'll talk a little bit more about chargebacks as well. So on the platform itself, what do we do to verify bidders? Again, going back to the beginning, it's not something that is 100%. Unfortunately, there's not a thumbprint on an internet profile. But we do verify credit cards. So we do a $0 check to make sure that it's a real credit card. We do verify a phone number. So it's got to be a real cell or landline. If it's a VoIP phone, we automatically disable that in the beginning, which is not necessarily ideal, but unfortunately VoIP phones, with Google phones and other systems like that, you can create a new phone number every single day if you really wanted to. So we've made the decision at this point, any VoIP phones that are signed up, we make them go through another step to just go through our support team, and then we can approve them from there. We have other screening checks that we do, with all the accounts that we have, anything that matches up, email, phone number, address, names, IP addresses, all that activity we're able to run against it to make sure, that it's not tied to another bidder. And there's a lot of webs on the back end that we see that can tie different people together, and it's interesting to see what people try to get away with. And then lastly, the new bidder limit. So we don't allow a new account to just come in and bid for $100,000 on 30 different auctions. We do shut those down initially until we can do some further verification. So, the goal there, someone signs up 5 minutes before the auction closes. We don't want them to go haywire and sabotage potentially an entire auction without a further look at it. So those are some of the things that we're doing on the system side. Like I said, it's something we take very seriously. We are, always looking at what we can do to enhance that. And we do rely on your information and your experience. And if you have ideas as well, that would be helpful. Please let us know, because, we want to prevent this as much as we possibly can. So why does this vigilance matter? Obviously, going back, we have all these things in place, but that doesn't mean there aren't cracks in the armor there that people can finagle their way around, unfortunately. So it's very important that we have an extra set of eyes, or you have those flags go up, especially on specific assets, which we'll talk about. But higher value transactions, usually the fraudulent activity, it's not tied to $100 or less. It's usually 500 plus that you see. Some easy things to look at, and I'll show you some ways that we show you this in the system. But address mismatches. If the shipping address that they want is different than the address on the account, which is different than the address on the credit card, that's a big red flag. Why are they doing this? If it's a PO box or one of those shipping buildings, that's a big red flag that you want to look at. New user accounts, they should always be looked at, with an extra set of eyes, just because they don't have any history with us or they have limited history with us. If they have 100 paid invoices, I feel pretty confident that you're not going to have an issue. If they have one and it was in the last 2 days, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're 100%. Never going to have an issue with them either. So newer accounts, that by the bidder ID, they go in sequential order. We're up to 510, 11,000 right now. You can see that pretty clearly when those bidders are new. Phone confirmation is always great. If they refuse to talk to you on the phone, if they just want to talk via email, text, WhatsApp, anything they're not willing to discuss over the phone, that's a big red flag for me. So that's an easy first step. Give them a call. Is it a business line? Is it a personal line? Do they answer? Do they call you back? Do they call you back from a different number? Why are they doing that? Those are things you want to just keep your eyes open for. Some other things that you can do, like we talked about, there's the bidder profile, bidder history, taking an extra look at that. I'll show you what those look like. There's different tools out there as well that we actually show you the IP address that they sign up on. So if you wanted to run that IP, you could just Google, IP lookup, and you could see, okay, is that the address says Washington, the IP's in Florida, and the credit card's in New York for some reason, or the shipping address is New York. That big red flag there. Why are they 3 different locations? That should be something that you're taking a real hard look at. There are some disposable emails which we've blocked or tried to block in the system. I don't have that list in front of me, but if you see an email that looks off, you can Google just the back end of it. So if it's we'll use Gmail as a poor example, but you could Google the Gmail email service and see what it is. If it's one of those disposable or throwaway, that should be a big red flag as well. And when to verify, I think those that have been in the business for a while, just kind of anecdotally through experience, will know what feels off or what feels different that needs an extra look at. If anyone's super urgent, if they're bidding over what you think something's worth and then they want it shipped, they're calling you or texting you within 10 minutes of the auction close, that's okay, hold on, what's going on here? If they don't care what they pay for it, they just want it as fast as they can. That to me is another red flag that warrants taking a step back and breathing. And as we're talking through these issues and some things to look for, I want you to be thinking about your procedures, your policies, and also your terms. So if you're requiring something of someone before you're willing to ship it or before you're willing to release it at removal, you do want to have that noted in your terms as well. We want to have something to point back to that says, hey, no, we reserve the right to require you to send us further identification or require you to pay via wire transfer because it's over $1,000 and you're an unproven entity. All those things you can dictate. They got to be reasonable, but in order to dictate them, we want them listed in our terms, our payment terms, all those boxes on the edit auction page. You want to spell that stuff out so there's nothing that catches anyone by surprise. And again, you can point back to that and tell them that it was listed there beforehand, so there's no ambiguity. We talked about some of the things in the system. We do give you these bidder profile information. So, once a bidder wins an item from you, you will see not only their address on file, but the billing address, which is the address used for the credit card on file. You'll also see there's the sign up IP, when it was created, last time they were logged in, where they came from. That's the refer one there. The big one that's been helpful, and I'm sure you've all seen it, is that the enabled status, and then the 1 and 0 number. So 1 just indicates they have 1 paid, 0 unpaid invoices. So that's another thing we've built in. So at a glance, you can see what kind of history this person has. Really helpful. When you see that person with 1,000 paid invoices, we have a number of them. They're probably a really good buyer, and it's worth maybe mentioning it and trying to give them a good experience, because they've been a big supporter, and I've probably been on multiple auctions of yours, and those buyers are the type that we want. We want them to keep coming back, and they're obviously loyal. So if you give them a good experience, they'll probably be back. Here's a different profile. So this bidder has not bid on this affiliates auction. So you don't get the name and the sign-up address, but they don't have an invoice with you yet. But you still have access to where they're from, their IP, when they've logged in, when it was created, all of those things as well. So I just wanted to show you that difference there. And then when you're on that bidder profile page, which all it takes is to click on it to get into the profile page, you can see the history of the invoices below as well. So I'd encourage you to play around with that and take a look. There's also a notes section there that you can leave specific notes that are just for you, and we would see them on our end. So if you have issues with someone, even if they're just rude and not necessarily we want them off the platform, but if they're rude or disrespectful, we want those notes, because if we see that three different times, now we've indicated a trend. It's not just they're having a bad day. It's, well, maybe they are just a jerk, and we need to really decide if that's the type of customer that we want out there, and if it's worth the headache for everyone, which unfortunately does happen from time to time. Another layer here that we show, and this is if you use PayTrace as your payment option for credit cards, but this is on the list invoices page, and you'll notice when a payment is made via PayTrace, it'll go to the status paid card on file. It will also show you quickly at a glance what name was on the credit card used and where that was located, and if it's not exact, it'll be red. So there's going to be some false positives here. This is even the difference between Ken and Kenneth shows up in red. But the reason we wanted it in red is, okay, this should stand out a little bit. So if the credit card's not Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, maybe it's Wyoming or something. Again, just another flag to look at. Okay, what did they win? What is their history? The more stuff that we can provide you like that at a glance, that allows you to just take an extra look, is what we're trying to do. So that's why we've done that there. Unfortunately, Square does not use a card on file. It's a separate API, and the buyer punches that information in. So we can't get that back and show it similarly as we have here. But I do know that on your back end of Square, if you logged in, if you have concerns over a buyer, you can see more information of those transactions. Who are they? Where they're from? It's just not on the back end of KBID at this point. All right. Now, when we're talking about these fraudulent items, 99% of the time it's going to fall into these high risk categories, and it's the high value items that are easy to resell. That it's coins, bullion, jewelry, watches, high end electronics, some collectibles, not as much, but things that are easy to flip to make a buck. Coins, precious metals, really the gold, silver, that type of stuff really is probably highest on that list. We do see it with electronics, some Apple type items as well. So if you're selling those items, this is really for you, and you really want to be taking an extra look and extra precautions. And some of that may be, and my recommendation would be, if you're selling items in those categories, potentially you have to turn off online payment for those items that you believe are going to be over $1,000 and require a separate form of payment. And maybe once you've verified who those winning bidders are, you can turn that back on and allow them to pay. Unfortunately, there's not a built-in process to handle that. But really, that's the first way. Is we're not taking credit card on those if they're being shipped out of state and it's over $1,000. We want a wire transfer. Now, going back to our terms, those are all things we want to dictate and make sure it's not hidden, because we don't want to start throwing out policies that aren't listed anywhere, because how would the buyer expect that? And yes, will this be inconvenient for some legitimate buyers? Probably, but it does save. It's the most protection you can do. The best protection right away is just not taking that credit card until you take another look. Another thing you can do, insurance is not optional, it's mandatory. We'll talk about what insurance can and can't do in regards to shipping, but making that mandatory and then having a signature confirmation as well. Those cost a little bit more, but it's worth that, and you can pass that on to the buyer. And again, we want to dictate that in there. And then lastly, we'll get into this a little bit more, but documentation. Are you photographing items before they're shipped? We haven't seen this scenario that much, where it's been quite a while, but an item shipped and they state that it's not as was described, or it's a completely different item. If you've documented, done your pre-work, again, it's more work, but if you build it into your process, it shouldn't be that much more lift on your end. But the more data, the more facts that you can come back with to alter or counter any claims like that, it all is going to be helpful, and photographs are going to be the biggest thing in that aspect. Now, in regards to shipping insurance, it's important that you understand what that does cover and what it doesn't cover, because fraud is a big one that it does not cover. If you think that just because you're charging insurance means that it's going to cover you in those fraudulent charges, it's not the case. It will cover loss during transit, damage to the merchandise, theft accepted by a carrier. I'm not quite sure what the difference is between that or carrier handling errors. I suppose if it's left on the doorstep and then it's stolen, it would probably depend by the carrier as far as if they cover that in their insurance. And another good thing for you to look at, if you use one or the other, USPS, FedEx, whatever it may be, what do their insurance policies look like and what does it cover? Again, in an overall sense, what it does not cover is chargebacks, fraudulent non-receipt items, buyer's remorse disputes, delivery without signature, things that we've talked about. Now, again, some critical protection steps: that signature on delivery, very good to have. Ship to a verified billing address. So if you have it on the credit card, if you have the credit card address that we showed you on the bidder profile, ideally that's the one it's being shipped to. If they want it somewhere else, okay, now the questions start. First thing I would do is I Google that address. Okay, it's a ship. Sorry, I lost connection there. I think I lost connection, but here we go. Like I said, if the first thing I'm doing, if the address that they're providing, the ship to address, is different than the credit card, I'm looking it up. If it's in a strip mall and in Florida, I'm taking an extra look of do I really want to ship it there? Is that just one of those stations that takes in items and sends them out right away that no one really has to be tied to? Those are dangerous, so stay away from those. And then again, going back to, if they have some history but you're still not sold on it, give me a call, let us know on the support side. We're happy to look into those even further for you. Now, again, we talked about some of the best practices for minimizing those shipping disputes. It starts with the photograph. Are you sending out the right item? That photograph really protects you. It doesn't, have to be this grandiose thing, but, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be in all items. It's kind of a risk assessment. Is it only on items over $500, or what do you want to, what's that number for you that you want to implement, systems like this for added protection. During shipping, use that track shipping number. Only use reputable carriers. We know who they are. You've likely used them before. Again, require that signature. After delivery, get that confirmation. If you're sending out the confirmation numbers to the bidders, they'll have all that information at the same time that you do, and then keep that documentation for at least 90 days. And then when those claims come, you'll have the supported documents, supportive photographs that you can utilize to fight those claims and hopefully win those claims. Now, this isn't necessarily a shipping only webinar here, but some quick best practices. Good boxes, what they are. If you're reusing boxes, just make sure that they're not going to fall apart. If you're using poor inventory or poor boxes and they fall apart, that's on you. Don't leave that open space in there, the void fill. Use packing peanuts, use paper, whatever you have on hand. Make sure that things aren't jumbling around and getting broken. You don't want to learn that the hard way. Sealing and labeling, use good tape it up, over tape it. That's what I do. I probably put way too much on there, but if it is fragile, depending on your carrier, do they have stickers or things that you need to write in there? That's all stuff that you can do. Again, I like to include an invoice in that package as well. To print off an extra one. Some people do some cool things, the thank you note or something like that as well. But it's good to have that documentation in there so when they get it, they don't forget where it came from and why they're getting this package. International shipping, really tread carefully here. We don't have a ton of international buyers, and actually it's turned off by default if you're not in North America, US, Canada. That it's not automatically that they can sign up and register. We do have ways to get people in to register, but most of the assets, if it's not a collector type auction or big piece of equipment, most of those assets in a couple $100 range, they're not going overseas. So be very diligent on that. If you do have out of international buyers that want to participate, you can certainly send them to us and we can facilitate ways to make that happen and ways to make that work. Ultimately, there's a lot of caution sending items over there overseas, specifically on the payment side. I wouldn't do anything without a wire transfer. And again, where is it going? Are you doing the due diligence? Just look that up. Look up the location. Is it a company that does this? Because there are companies that will facilitate overseas shipping. You probably feel a little more confident using one of them rather than just sending it wherever they state to. So we've somewhat avoided a lot of the international problems because most of the items that are being sold aren't necessarily need to go overseas. But then again, as we grow, these are things that we're going to have to take on from the development side and the fraud prevention side on our end, and then pass on the information and best practices to affiliates as well. Other tips here as we're about to wrap this up. 90% of chargebacks that we see they're preventable. It's not really fraud necessarily in the classic sense. It's just a disagreement. You said it was this, it's actually that. Now you're saying I can't take it back. Those types of things. In those situations, we do disable a bidder account if they've done a chargeback. It does not matter. That's the step one for us is your account's going to get disabled, and then we'll figure out what the best steps are. And we have a lot of good tips as well in the knowledge base for fighting chargebacks, just specifics of where to get terms, where to get timestamps, different things like that. But again, the biggest prevention for that is really starts when we catalog an auction, because what we tell people when we show them, we want that to be accurate. And unfortunately, a lot of the chargeback issues come back to either we didn't do our job and we told them something that was wrong, and then we wanted to stick them with it, or there was just a disagreement. And sometimes there's always situations where one party's wrong or the other party. We try not to be the judge and jury in those situations, but we can certainly help facilitate communication and figure out what is the best path forward here, so no one's left holding the whole bag in those situations. Last tip here for today, it's specifically on that like switcheroo situation where someone buys something or doesn't buy something and then they show up and remove it. Is we do have the option to require a signature on invoices. I like to do it in, just as an added layer of who you are and signing off. And it's not a bad idea as well to include, again, in your terms and removal information. If they're sending someone else, what's your process for that? Do you need to verify an ID? Do you need to know the name of the person that they're sending? If nothing else, have them verify information on the address of the winning bidder. What's their name, what's their phone number, what's their email, what's their bidder ID. If they can do that, they're most likely the person that was supposed to be sent to pick up those items. And that's it. There's a lot here on the fraud side of things. Primarily, I just wanted the biggest takeaway from today. If you're selling those coins, gold, precious metals, high-end electronics, those are the people that really need to be taking an extra look and being very careful and using some of the tips that we talked about today. If there's one takeaway from today, that's it. I would, if I'm selling those items, I'm looking at my terms right now and my shipping terms, and I'm looking at requiring, wire transfers or other payment methods for anything over $1,000. How do I do that? How do I work that into my process? That's really up to you how you want to handle it. But again, looking at your terms and how you spell that out so buyers are not taken by surprise and they know what to expect up front. That's the most important thing for today. If you're going to take one takeaway away is, the things that are most likely to be fraudulent activity are the easy things to flip that are high value. Unfortunately, when we do have these scenarios, it's 99.9% those types of assets. Thanks for joining us today. If you have other questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out, and appreciate you joining. Thanks.